feeling pretty.
Yeah, we are alive.
But we need him though, don't we? At least if we're gonna vote on anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Joel said he'd be, Kelly said he'd be here, so. Joel Ferraro.
I know.
If not, I don't think.
He's probably in City Hall now.
No, but we, even if we vote to move forward with something as a redraft.
Who wrote this?
So this started out as my take and enhancement
Yeah,
of what
no discussion.
Connor and Alex had done.
Yeah.
And that all came about because this comprehensive plan, it did incorporate some principles for putting capital planning into the mix. But it wasn't going to be lengthy and detailed. So the more detailed piece came from Alex and Connor. And I took the liberty of enhancing it with this and,
Yeah,
Yep.
our
and that's,
consultant for the comp helps.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. I could give some background on that, on the comp plan, the whole process. Let me just first test and see, Connor, are you there and able to see and hear us?
Yes, I'm here and I can see and hear you.
Great, great. So Paul, do we want to give some more time for the other members?
yeah, I think it's just a few minutes, after 5:30. Let's give them,
And if not, we can just continue and send them the recording, you think?
yeah.
Okay. That's good.
We had one member come down with food poisoning. Oh, Kelly's online. Good. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Kelly. She's muted.
You're muted.
You guys hear me okay?
No,
We're good.
Okay. I'm gonna mute. My dog is lurking, so I'll mute until I have to speak.
We got enough anyway now.
Yeah, I mean, we can,
The subcommittee.
Okay, so I could set the stage, I think, and.
let me just call it to order
Hurricane, okay.
and do the
Yeah.
proper thing.
Yeah.
The official thing.
Yeah. Capital Improvements Advisory Board is called to order at 5:30 on March 6th. And the Rose Baker Senior Center. It's a hybrid meeting. The meeting is being recorded. And it is a 2 agenda item. One, a presentation, an update on the status of capital projects in the city with the CFO, Connor McCorkle, and discussion of board members with Alex Koppelman, the Community Development Director, about where we stand on implementing a comprehensive capital planning program. The minutes from the last time we met, which go all the way back to December of 2023, when we did an online hybrid session with the Comprehensive Planning Initiative consultant, are available. We never approved those minutes. 2 subsequent attempts to meet subsequent to that have waited for other things to happen, which didn't. So we are here today to take up the recommendations of the board for how to move forward with comprehensive capital planning program. So Alex, if you want to introduce anything, or Connor.
Yeah, so I think it might be helpful to just understand where the guidelines that we're gonna discuss for capital improvement came from. So we've been working through a comprehensive planning process for the growth of the whole city. This has been going on for almost 2 years now. And in the last phase, we were workshopping strategies on how to implement certain plans. And this is very broad. I mean, it goes all the way from housing to the economy to preserving open space, all of these different things. But Paul joined us for the working sessions and really talked about how we need to use this as an opportunity to call attention to how we can improve the capital and planning process here in the city. So we were working together with Paul and our technical assistance provider, JM Goldson, and their team to really come up with some detailed recommendations of how to improve capital planning. They got very detailed, and since the comprehensive plan is really a high-level document that speaks to lots of different things, we decided it was best to have a recommendation around improving the capital planning process in the comp plan, and then take the detailed recommendations and create them to be guidelines that could serve as a tool for this board, for the administration, for staff that work on capital improvements and budgeting in general, not just for us, but also for future staff to really strengthen continuity. You know, as we understand that that's an issue sometimes. So the best practices that I think were circulated by Paul, they are based on you know, some recommendations from the consultant, as well as best practices from the Division of Labor Services, DLS.
Local, Division of Local Services.
Division of Local
In the
Services.
Department of Revenue.
In the Department of Revenue. So basically, there's a lot there. You know, we understand that the board here plays an advisory role, but you need to be empowered to do that. We need to have a capital plan and a way to look at the assets in order for that to happen. And I can, you know, I think speak for the entire city leadership when I say we understand the importance of being able to do that. But there is a lot of resources, time, funding needed to really get to where it should be. And we want to do that, but it will take some time. So while we're working towards what ideally the capital improvement planning process will be, we want to take some short steps in the meantime to continue to make progress and, you know, utilize your board's expertise better than it has been. So what we thought we would do today is have Connor, our relatively new CFO, give you a little bit overview of what goes into making decisions involving capital improvements today, and speak to some of the fiscal realities around that. And then we could talk about some of the best practices that were laid out and some of the feedback that we've got that we want to look at discussing with you to update. And then talk about some of these short-term steps that I mentioned, that things that we could accomplish before we get to that big goal of revamping the whole process.
City Hall, sorry.
For this meeting,
I just said, he's at City Hall.
figure there are enough reasons you could be there any other week, so they should start charging you rent.
Apologies.
Joel Favazza has joined the meeting. We now have 4 members present.
Thanks, Joel. So I was just giving a quick intro. I'll just recap it quickly. City has been working through this 1.5 year long comprehensive planning process. Paul joined us for the technical working sessions and really spoke to the importance of revamping and improving the capital planning process here in the city. So as a part of that, we created a lot of best practices of ideally how this process should look. It's based on DLS best practices and recommendations from our consultant. So in our comp plan, which is the big vision for the city, we talk about improving the capital planning process. And then what Paul circulated to the board is the more detailed steps and best practices that need to be taken to do that. We really want to make that change, but being realistic, we know it is a big lift of resources and time and funding. So it won't happen overnight, but we thought that we would talk to you tonight about some of the short steps we can take while we're also working towards that more ideal capital planning process. And so we're going to kick it off with our CFO to give a little bit of update on you know, how capital decisions are made and some of the fiscal realities around that right now. Then we'll talk about the best practices, and then we'll talk about a couple of things that we think we can do right now.
Alex, I'm not able to share my screen. It says that the room is sharing its screen, so it just won't let me pull up the deck.
Okay, that's an issue. I can't share my screen either.
The host.
That might have been might not have been assigned. Or maybe it can come from here.
Yeah, that's just the host right there.
Have you been?
Busy.
Yeah, not bad. You have a spring soccer season?
Yes, we're gonna get practice going. If it stays, weather stays like this, we'll start doing some beach practices. The fields will all be too muddy to touch. But,
They are by definition,
well,
so no more.
yeah.
Connor, in the interest of time, I think we could just circulate your slides afterwards, and if you could just talk through it for us.
So that wasn't much,
No, I couldn't get it up there. I have to be made admin, and I'm not, so,
That's something Allison would have.
yeah. So it's just a few slides. We can circulate it afterwards, and I think Connor can just give us the big picture.
Yeah, I can just kind of give a general overview. As Alex said, I'm Connor McCorkle. I'm the relatively new CFO for the city of Gloucester. I wanted to touch on three things today. So it's sort of the historical look at how we've made capital funding decisions in the past. I have a list of capital funding projects, which maybe Alex is pulling up there. And then just a quick overview of kind of what we're seeing as the city's financial landscape going into the next couple fiscal years. So Alex, I'm looking at the slide that's got sort of the 5 octagons on it, if you're pulling it up.
Yep, that's what we got.
Okay, so I think the way we've made capital funding decisions in the past can be boiled down to these 5 categories. Some of them a little bit more proactive and some of them a little bit more reactive. The first is planned replacements and upgrades of capital assets. When I think of something like that, I think about school buses. We're always keeping an eye on what our how old our school buses are, when they need to be replaced. And we're just tracking those a little bit more closely. We make decisions when municipal funds become available. So I think a good example of that would be when we certify free cash every year. Last year we put $750,000 into the building maintenance stabilization fund. At that time, we reached out to facilities in the school department and said, we have $750,000 in our building maintenance stabilization fund. Are there any requests you'd like to make? The center tile is probably our biggest one, and it's when grant opportunities arise. That's probably the primary way that we are making capital decisions to this point. A grant becomes available. There may be a cost match component, or it may be 100% funded by the grantor, and that's what prompts us to really dig into the project. The next one is public input and engagement. So when I think of that, I think of repair of private ways. Most recently, the Rust Island deep water lines. Those are projects that are really driven by citizens and making requests and approaching the city council, and that's sort of how those projects come into fruition. And then on the far right, it's emergent needs. So something breaks down, we know we have to replace it, and we have to make a decision at that point to replace it. Next slide is probably very tiny on Alex's screen, but it's just a list of all the capital funding projects that we have going on right now. I can run through each of them if you think that would be helpful, or I can kind of talk about them generally.
Yeah, if you send the slides, we can look.
Sounds good. So as you can see, we have a mixture of different projects going on right now, some funded inside the debt limit, some funded outside of the debt limit. Some of them are funded with grants and also stabilization and other city reserve funds.
So can I ask a question about this slide?
Sure.
Just to, kind of do a spot check. 15 years ago, your predecessor was a guy named Jeff Town, and he told this board then, and this is back when the sewer treatment plant was approximately $100 million project, but half as much as it is now. And he said, once that hits, it's over. We are not going to be building anything, replacing anything. It's going to suck up the rest of our debt capacity. And so I'm curious how 15 years later and $100 million more, whether Jeff's assessment remains accurate that this is pretty much going to just be the thing we can fund, or whether, your outlook is that no, in fact, the debt service on this will not be the entirety of our ability to borrow in the future.
So no, the debt service on this is not taking up the entirety, but it does severely limit it. So as of our last look, we had $63 million of debt service capability, even with the sewer treatment plant. That number changes every time we make a debt payment, so it's only going to increase as we pay down principal.
So for example, in 2015, the school committee and city council authorized the consolidation of the elementary schools into 3. We are 2/3 of the way through that, and we are due now to consolidate Plum Cove and Beaman, and that's got a price tag about $100 million. So do we have the debt capacity to do that project that's been planned for 10 years plus the sewer, or is $100 million? Assume MSBA kicks in 45 of it, so it's really 55. You have to borrow the whole thing, but you would get like the reimbursement, right? You know, I'm trying to figure like how, because we're in this conversation about protocol and procedure and stuff, that's great, but like the reality is, I'm just curious, is there the ability to create capital improvements throughout the city if we have this $200 million sewer treatment plant, and then theoretically, we're supposed to be having this, you know, $100 million school thing that, again, is been in the works for 10 years, right? So like, what does that do to us?
That's before you get to central fire.
Yeah,
That's always, but that's never been approved, right? That's always been kind of talked about.
Yeah, for 100 years.
Yeah, right. So I was curious, you know, are we still able to do those kind of things, or is the capital projects we're gonna be looking at going to be, you know, 6-figure items because there's no room for 8, you know, or, you know, 8-figure items?
I would say the sewer treatment plant is really dependent on what the city council decides, or if it decides to do a debt shift from the enterprise fund outside of the tax levy limit. That's really going to change the scope of what we can do in the upcoming years.
That means putting on the ratepayers?
It means taking it off the ratepayers and putting it onto the tax or real estate tax.
Oh, okay, I got you. Thank you.
So if they were to do that, that happens outside of our normal levy limit, which gives us a little more flexibility for larger projects like a Beam and Plum Cove consolidation.
Got it.
I mean, to Joel's point, I think there's still an ongoing issue, what small projects have a meaningful impact because you're replacing stuff that ages out. And yet, I think one of the things we have to do is make sure that that kind of funding persists. It doesn't sort of dry up and then you end up with heating plants that crap out.
Yeah, I'm sorry to derail. I just, you know, this table, I think, kind of, you know, provides the scope of, you know, whether everyone works real hard on this, you know, the city works really hard in getting a plan together, we provide our input as required, and then we go, okay, great, but.
The
but we can't do anything because there's no money.
Right. If we had money, we'd do these in this order, this well thought out, you know, over the next X years and in this priority, but, you know, will it actually be workable? So I appreciate the context here. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, Connor.
Yeah.
No, and I think as in the next couple of slides, we're looking at kind of the city's financial picture, and that's kind of what worries me more, is not so much the capital costs, it's the fixed costs that we're looking at for the next 10 or so fiscal years. I know my predecessor, John Dunn, was more concerned about those. So the next one I'm looking at, city financial landscape, again, that's probably very, very tiny. But it looks at the next 5 years on our general fund operating budget. And it projects what kind of surplus or deficit we might have. Right now, we're in the midst of FY26 planning. We're going through a pretty robust effort to increase department fees so that they're in line with what the service really costs. So as of now, we're looking at a $1.9 million deficit in the next fiscal year. So we're asking all departments to submit level funded budgets. So what they got in FY25 is what they'll get in FY26. That will help ease this gap, and we're hoping that the increase in fees will ease the rest of the gap. But you can see in 27 through 30, if the trends continue like they are now, if building insurance continues to go up, health insurance continues to go up, you know, we're looking at a $3 million deficit, 4, and it creeps up to 5, unless things start to teeter off and change. But based on the trend, that's what we're looking at. And I think that's what gives me a little more pause about it, less about debt capacity and more about what payments we can actually make out of the general fund each year.
Mhm.
Sorry, Connor, if I'm sorry, in new tax growth.
Mhm.
To generate an even $1 million in revenue, what's the amount of what's the amount of the value of a commercial operation? Is it $100 million facility has to get opened up to generate $1 million? Like what's the kind of ratio there for new growth tax revenue?
I don't know the comparison between the two. I wouldn't know that. I'd have to ask our assessor to get a better sense of that. I'm not familiar with it.
Okay. What's the commercial tax rate, do you know?
I can look it up. I don't know off the top of my head.
And
But that's what we don't have is the commercial tax base. That's what limits us. Everything is on the residents, which makes it very challenging. So when we
Right.
see new growth, our new growth is primarily either residential or it's national grid. That's what really drives it for us.
So if it's $10 for every 1,000, that's 1%, right? So $100 million gets you, $100 million Gloucester Crossing gets you $1 million, right? So I'm just trying to think of like, if 5 years from now we have a $5 million deficit, you would need $500 million in new growth value,
Yeah.
taxable value, just to grab that 5 million,
it's not gonna happen.
right? You'd have to have cell signaling, instead of doing it in Manchester, do it one a year for the next 5 years somewhere in Gloucester, right? Just trying to get, it's,
Context or
Yeah.
perspective.
Right.
What
Yeah.
about that? I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna ask about when the department heads put in their budget for fiscal year, who's screening it and looking at it? I mean, I used to write budgets and I'd pad the hell out of them, I mean, is that?
Yeah.
going on? Are we keeping an eye on that?
They go through a pretty robust review, so they get to submit their own. They'll sit down with the CAO and me, and we do a cursory pass. Then it goes to the mayor, and then the city council's budget and finance subcommittee reviews every line on every budget, and then it goes to a public hearing. So there is a pretty robust budget review process.
And then does it result in any reduction in the request?
Yes, often where the most reductions come in is when they meet with the CAO and myself. We know what the financial landscape is, so we know when things need to be pulled to make this balance.
Well, we got the slides up now.
Yeah. Want me to keep going? This is just a short list of cost drivers. The big cost drivers we're seeing this year is health and liability insurance. Health insurance is slated to go up between 12 and 14%. It's never gone up that much before. We're told to feel lucky because other communities are seeing it upwards of 19 to 21%. Increased debt.
80% or 50,
75.
75?
Increased debt service costs. So we've recently completed the police station, the elementary school, doors and windows. We've had a lot of big capital projects recently end. So in this fiscal year, you'll see it in the next chart, we're seeing sort of a peak in our debt repayment, and it's just because so much new debt is coming online. And then the last item is our unfunded pension liability. So we have agreed to fully fund our unfunded pension liability by fiscal year 2034. That means each year our pension liability expense goes up 6%. So this year it's pretty significant. I think it's around $12 to $13 million, and that will increase 6% every year until we fully fund it. That's a mandate from the state, so we're sort of obligated to continue funding at that pace. But if you're growing 2.5% each year on the tax base, and you're going up 6% each year on your unfunded pension liability, obviously things in other areas need to be cut to make up for that.
Is the GHS debt service done at this point?
Yeah, there is no GHS debt service. Right now, we're seeing that O'Malley Doors and Windows is coming online. The portion of the portion of East Veterans that's not exempt from the tax levy is starting to come online. So we're feeling all those payments start to trickle in.
Are we halfway through West Parish?
Not halfway. We recently started West Parish. We're all 3 years into it.
For a school, like, what?
It opened in 7.
They've been open for a long time.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of a lag. It takes longer than you'd think for the debt service to come online. So typically, the way John Dunn did it he would short-term borrow during the life of the build. Then we'd have one last year when the build was completed, where we'd have a short-term borrow. And then the long-term borrowing starts in the following year. So it takes a little bit longer than you might think for that debt to actually come online and hit our repayment schedule.
And this school building assistance is retroactive, right? It's not prospective, so it's coming in after you've incurred the expense.
Exactly, right. We see it long after the expense is made and usually after the project is done. So what you're seeing in this chart here is sort of like the life of our debt based on what we have issued right now. So you can see in 2022, it was around $14 million. In 2026, next year, it's over $20 million. And that's because all those projects are now coming online. We're seeing the debt service. So I think we're at a point where this needs to be the peak for a while, and it needs to kind of relax from here. So it's something that we can sustain a little better.
Does this chart anticipate the $200 million sewer treatment debt?
It does not, because that debt would either appear on the enterprise fund and it would be passed over to the ratepayer, or it would appear as a debt shift if the city.
Right, okay, as you mentioned, right, with the councilors make the decision.
Right.
And then, I imagine this graph looks very different if, you know, it comes over to this side, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So what we're seeing now is assuming that either it's going to be funded by a debt shift or it's going to be passed on to the ratepayer, so we have a corresponding amount of revenue each year to support it.
Connor, do you have a feel for where Sawyer Library trustees are with their fundraising? Whether we're exposed at all on them coming up short?
When I last heard, they were, I think, about halfway there, and they felt confident that they would get the rest of the way there. So at this point, we've only borrowed short-term loans to help them bridge the gap till they complete the funding. But they seem confident that they will be able to.
Fully fund.
Correct. And they've agreed to cover any short-term interest costs that we've incurred in the meantime.
Well, that's one thing off the plate.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, right, yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine there's anything in anyone's pipeline to help with the sewage plant. State or certainly not federal funding at this point.
There's no federal funding, right?
Yeah. We've met with federal delegations and we've kind of told them our story, and I don't know what's come of it, but I have not seen any money come through.
What about Essex?
So Essex, we have an agreement with them. And depending on how the loan ends up, if it ends up on the ratepayer, if it ends up as a debt shift, they would pay their portion of the loan. So there is in the agreement, there's a predetermined formula that says if it becomes a debt shift, your amount will increase this much. If it's ratepayer, your amount will increase that much.
You gotta imagine our story isn't very sympathetic, right? Because the story is, you know, in 1976, we were offered,
I know, free.
90%.
yeah, 90% funding from federal and state, and we said, no, we don't want to tear up Washington Street, so we're not doing a CSO project, and no, we don't want to, you know, build that plant again, so get out of here.
We lived through it. That was the end, yeah.
And you're in sort of this crazy position of, I think, as Joel suggested, trying to think everything is normal with the Damocles sword of the sewage plant over all of this. Is there a timeline we should be thinking about? Are we really going to go down a path of starting construction in 2 to 3 years and incurring debt? No matter who's paying for it down?
To make it even a little bit more complex, the secondary water treatment plant is not going to be funded through traditional bond sales. It's going to be funded through the Mass Clean Water Trust.
Yeah.
Which is great. It gives you competitive interest rates. It's going to save us a lot of money in interest costs.
That's SRF or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah.
But they will only fund in $50 million a year increments. They make you take short-term debt for a year at 0% interest. So it's a little harder to estimate when we're really going to start feeling it. But from what I can see, it'll be in $50 million increments starting in FY27. So we really won't feel the full effect of the water treatment plant until 2031, fiscal 2031.
Okay.
By then, one of those doomsday glaciers could have melted and they can't build it there anyway, and we'll just,
Half of us will be dead.
Armageddon will have happened.
Yeah, it's fine, yeah.
So, yeah, don't worry about it, Connor, we got it.
Yeah,
Right. Good.
Tide's coming in.
okay, sorry to keep derailing, but just,
Well, it's the reality of what we are confronting here, and the question is, to do a comprehensive capital planning program takes some cash for personnel, for systems, and so if we're still left with this uncertainty, how far down the path do you want to go with trying to embrace a full-throated capital planning program if for the next 3 to 5 years, you're sort of stuck wondering,
Might take 3 to 5 years to get this whole thing implemented and properly embedded in the system and the city's mindset. Right now, they just, whack-a-mole kind of thing. I hate to say it, but that's where I feel.
well, my curiosity also, and so again, I do appreciate the amount of effort that's been put in, to date on moving this. And it's obviously, unfair to you and Connor because,
Yeah, you're brand new at it.
right, you're just,
Yeah.
but so, so again, I've been on this board since 2010, like on this board because Mayor Kirk was like, John Bell never used the CAB the way he was supposed to. I'm gonna get this thing going. And then it did, right? And then Svatia became mayor and she was, Carolyn, DeCina was like, Carolyn never used CAB the way she was, we're gonna get this thing going. And then Greg became mayor, he goes, Svatia wasn't gonna say, but we're gonna get this thing going. And now we're like on round 2 of Greg being like, we're gonna get this thing going. And so it it requires there's 3 main pieces of buy-in that I've yet to ever see happen. One is city staff. I think we have that right now, The second is the actual, political part of the administration, political side. The third is the council, right? Because, I always kind of, I've had, I don't know how many counselors come to me over the years being like, why isn't the CAB doing things? I'm like, because you approve loan orders without demanding,
Not even-
right? That they go, like I said, no loan order comes to you and you go, where on the capital plan will I find this? What page will I find this? I presume you're not coming to me asking to build a new police station, without this already being long since put on a plan, right? This, and it's never the situation. The council says, oh, the police station needs to get fixed yesterday, so let's get this done, right? And so my point is not just rehash the past, but I'm curious how in the climate we're in now, given how difficult the financial situation is, period, how we're gonna be able to, get that buy-in from the, it's an election year coming up, right? 20,000 election year. And how we're gonna get buy-in from the political side of this, to be like, hey, no, we have decided as a mayor's office and a council that, we are committed to this plan and that we are, as of some date, a couple of years in the future, we're not gonna be seeing things come through that are.
So 2 things on that. One is, I think what Alex is saying, there's gonna be some steps taken, it'll be incremental. We should expect that to happen. I also think we need to look back at the ordinance and the charter, which limit the council's role in approving. They approve loan orders, they approve the guidelines for formulating the plan, but they don't approve the plan.
No, that's, yeah.
And so I think we need to get those guidelines established. What constitutes something that should be in the plan? What's the cost threshold? What prioritization scheme do you want to use? Yeah, and so that at least the basic elements of a plan are shared with everybody. It's transparent and there's some accountability for it and things don't sneak in because somebody talked to somebody. It's,
Well, Connor, while we're talking about, shorter term steps while we work towards this ideal process, do you want to talk about, plans for the upcoming fiscal year and the following fiscal year?
Yeah, I think, I might counter that with, even though we're entering really challenging fiscal times, this might be a time where it's more important than ever to have oversight on this because capital assets will still need to be replaced. The city just can't stop running because we have a lot of debt and we need someone or a group of people who can really help when we don't have a lot of resources, prioritize what do we need to do. So I know Jill Cahill and I have talked about next year ahead of the operating budget, opening up a capital request period. We were soliciting requests from department heads ahead of the operating budget to give this group an opportunity to look at, okay, here's what the department head, no, we might not have this big comprehensive plan yet, but these are the needs that have been identified by the leadership team, and how can we prioritize them, knowing that we really don't have many resources to fund them. So that's kind of where I see us going. And in the other area, in the short term, is writing fiscal policies that really spell out at what threshold are we capitalizing? How are we managing our debt? What are we allowing to be open on our debt capacity? I think there are things we can do in the meantime to kind of set up the framework to get this going.
I mean,
I agree with that.
I think I heard pretty clearly from Alex and you that what I had drafted looked very prescriptive, which was probably not the role of an advisory board to develop. On the other hand, all the elements of what should go into a comprehensive capital plan are here. So even if you have to pick and choose because you can't afford to do this, or we're not yet politically able to do that, the elements here, I think, need to be referenced somehow as best practices. And then you need to have some incremental steps that we spell out. Putting together a group of senior managers as a starting point that meets quarterly to discuss the status of capital planning, and does that in concert with what you're talking about, having agency department heads submit stuff. That's a low-hanging fruit. That should be done now. That's something we can do without incurring a cost. And there probably are some other milestones we could spell out. Certainly encourage the administration to spell out. Recognizing it's an election year, you don't do a lot of spelling this year, but those are the kinds of steps that I would encourage us to look at and either provide some input into the process you develop, or at least keep an eye on where things are at, and you can just report back to this board, whoever sits on it, down the road. So I think I would like to take another crack at this with Alex, just so that what is prescriptive just becomes descriptive, and what looks like a couple of action steps becomes sort of the milestones we judge how we can move forward, recognizing the complexity environment and the fiscal constraints, and building that into this understanding.
Yeah, I think I have a couple of points. One Connor alluded to, and I've alluded it to you, Paul, is that what do we call capital?
Right.
He's talking about a school bus. I don't think a school bus is capital improvement or necessary to even be brought up to board. Or a pickup truck or some other rolling
So you
equipment.
put a cost
I
threshold.
think we should
as to
put it,
what-
and that's what I want to ask him. Where do you feel the cost threshold for capital improvement should lie, Connor?
We had talked about it earlier. It was a project, greater than $100,000 total. Something like putting a dollar threshold on it. I come from an environment before this, when I was in private industry, where anything over $5,000 was capital, which was a nightmare, because then everything was capital. So we had talked about 100,000. Just kind of throwing a number out there.
Even that is, in my personal opinion, kind of low. You can't buy a dump truck for $100,000.
The downside of setting it too high is that you don't get a chance to look at the preventive maintenance and those kinds of investments
Yeah,
that should be going on.
Just get a new one every 3 years and nobody's gonna ask any questions.
Well, if-
I get that.
Or they don't get it, and then 6 years out, now you got a problem.
I can't find it on my phone, but like this, again, like this exists. This document exists. We did with Greg Cavatori. you know,
Yeah.
so I'll dig it up and I'll circulate what,
From 2012?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I've got it
No,
here.
no, no, not the report.
Oh, okay.
We defined like what triggered, you know, what was capital, right? I think $100,000, and again, that was 10 years ago at least, right?
Well, I guess that's where I'm going.
Right, right. And then, I mean,
Everything costs more today.
right, but we've, again, instead of reinventing the wheel, I'm happy to find, we did this once, right?
I can speak to Greg about it.
Yeah, it's probably some city drive also. I know I got it somewhere on I just can't find it on my phone. Yeah, that was, you know, that was helpful then too, because, you know, the fire department's request came in and it was like, well, yeah, if you need $30,000 for the respirators, we're going to look at that. Like, that's, you know, like,
I don't
that's
wanna
not,
know. That's your job.
that's,
Line item budget
Right.
item.
Right.
but like fire trucks, we were like, hey, you know,
Yeah, well, that's a lot of money.
but like, but we buy our fire, the school buses, Connor, I mean, the only reason the school buses are quote unquote planned is because they're on like rolling leases.
I thought they were,
Right, so-
yeah.
Yeah, so someone's, the planning is that there's a financing agreement that comes due and you have to either renew or get a new one, right? Like,
Or
it's not,
purchase them,
it's
yeah.
not because the school department
I
or
know.
the school committee is doing a good job of better than the rest of the city, it's because it's a lease, right? And so your lease runs, and you have to make a decision, right? But the fire trucks we buy, right? So that's a, you know,
Correct.
right. so
Ambulances.
that's-
that's- Right, and so, you know.
No, I
it's-
see three
you tell
old
me-
ones sitting down in the DPW barn now. They look perfectly good to me. I don't know what's wrong with them, but
Kelly, I didn't want to let you not sort of weigh in here because you took the time to do a bunch of comments. And I'll just share those.
Yep.
And raise some of these questions as well. So if you would like to share some of your thoughts and observations.
Yeah, I think the first one was who in 21E, who was going to be representing the police and fire department? Oh, I'm sorry, in the next line. It didn't look like there was a representative from there. Did that fall with the DPW or is that separate?
I mean, in my head, in my mind, it was like the chief administrative officer and whoever is working on behalf of the mayor, who appoints the police chief, who appoints the fire chief. So anybody who sort of
VP.
falls into
Okay.
those would probably be the CAO.
Okay.
Representing their interests, and that's where then you need to have the input of all those departments in a process, much like Connor described.
that's a 2E3.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And then another thought was, so if we're looking for requests and about the capital needs and how is the prioritization being done? Was that within, like, if, say they're making requests for, say, like 3 big ticket items, are they prioritizing within their department, their requests? And then how does all that get compared, at a higher level?
That's a good segue into the kind of the next step after kind of pulling capital requests from operating requests, separating those things. So you want to talk about how we could potentially rank and create criteria to rank those things, Connor?
Yeah, so I think, on the department level, from the administration side, when we do the requests, we'd be asking questions to kind of help us eke out what we think the priorities are. And then I think we would pass them along to you, and then you would have your own set of priorities and do your own review to prioritize them, and then provide that back to us.
I mean, there's all these different must have, should have, would like to have.
Right.
Yeah.
They'll all fall in these budgets if they're doing their job, because I'd make a wish list. Like
Right.
any other department head would, but somebody's gotta be able to read between the lines and say, what do we really need?
I know that when I had to do this, running the state hospital, you had a number of rationales that you checked the box, it was a public health issue, it was an emergency response type of thing. And there's actually a point system that was developed, which allowed you to sort of rank these. So I think that's part and parcel. Maybe we can, as a board, provide some input, but certainly it's something, it sounds like you're at least already thinking about, Connor, Alex, on how to move on the prioritization scheme,
Yeah,
schemata.
I think that's where, as board members, you could be really valuable in helping us think through what good criteria for ranking the requests would be.
Okay,
Okay.
so they just kicked it back to us, Kelly. Just say.
Our trusted advisors.
So, and then about the asset management software, would we be using, what we know from what the DPW has implemented? Would we use that like as a pilot program?
Yeah, there's an Atari there that we're gonna be working off of.
So this is really one of the things that I think speaks to like how this will be a bigger lift that will have to happen over time and is dependent on certain things that are somewhat out of our control. We understand that the right asset mapping software that you would want to have is quite expensive, but is a really also an important thing to have to be able to develop a good capital improvement plan that we could work off of. There has been some asset mapping work done for sewer infrastructure, and we were going to ask you if you think it would be beneficial to have the expert come and talk about that at maybe a future meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be
Yeah.
right. It's just, this is a $140 million organization, and in fact, there's no master spreadsheet where I can go, what year was this boiler installed? When's its service interval and when's its expected end of life?
There is, but based on that Doran Whittier assessment that was done in 2018, which has never been updated.
Right.
Yeah, so we can use that
At the
as
starting-
starting.
Yeah, but that doesn't have a lot of like unknown, like, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Right.
limited. And
Things change.
its functionality is.
So again, that's
very
what, right, so, but this, again, this, I'm just super curious to see how this, like Mike Hale, the throw him under the bus, but Mike Hale has been the DPW director since I started this board. I don't know how many times we recommended that, again, you don't have to go back and send a guy through every building to go retag everything with a QR code or a barcode, but like, just start now. Every new piece of, every new fixture that comes in, get their QR code or a barcode affixed to it and goes into your spread, and just build from there. Right, just start, like, I appreciate that decades of stuff you can't figure out, what the air handler in the third floor science wing of the high school is, right? Fine, I get that. But if you replace an air handler in the high school, that one goes on the list, right? And eventually, all the ones that are missing will drop out of the system, and you eventually will have naturally this thing, right? And again, this, I don't blame Alex or Connor for this, like, everyone's like, that's a great idea. It's a great idea. We should do that. Right? And so it's like,
Hey, we're back to square one.
right, so I'm just like, I'm as curious as I am in the process and the suggestions we're making. I am more curious in the how do we,
Implementation.
yeah, how's it different this time, right? Because these suggestions, you're right up here with Kelly's questions have been asked and answered repeatedly. Again, by some people who are still here, right? So it's not like, Alex and Connor just showed up and like, hey, we're just trying to go for this, right? Some of these people will be affected by suggestions have, been made aware of this multiple times. And I'm just curious what will be, how we get the buy-in, right? Because my first question is, how do we get the buy-in from, department heads and then the people with the power of the purse to actually say, hey, this is important.
Yeah, well, it comes from the top down.
So
Simple as
if
that.
you look at any models of systems change, and having had to do this in healthcare, which is constantly subjected to new models for how you do performance improvement and how you do quality improvement, you need a champion within the organization who's basically got carrots and sticks. And you need to be able to put this in job descriptions so that it's not something that is at the end of the other duties is
Yeah.
assigned. And it becomes institutionalized, formalized, a part of your workload, so that you've got deadline schedules and you're using, it's not easy. It's a heavy lift,
Well,
yes,
what-
but
what you're saying leads me to my second comment that I didn't get out earlier, is that you're talking about watering this down a little bit.
Not watering it
I-
down,
I-
just
I-
changing the emphasis.
I think it needs to be, you must do this and this and this, and that's the, you know, the
I
amended
agree,
ordinance.
Joe, but we're-
Otherwise, it's just gonna,
gather more dust.
yeah, or be ignored. That's too much work. I don't have time
And
for
I
that.
don't think the intention is to give it less power or make it less important. But to speak to the spirit of the board and what the ordinance says about the board and being advisory, it just needs to read a little bit more like a best practice. But the reason we want to have it is for one thing, for everyone to refer to us to be on the same page and to strengthen continuity between administrations and when new staff come and go.
So what if,
Who's
to
gonna
your
be the
point, John,
enforcer?
I understand exactly what you're saying, because
Hmm.
this just gets kicked down the road
Mike
like
can
the
say, I don't
sewage
wanna
plant
do it.
can.
The other, you know, the superintendent say, I don't have time for
Right,
that.
right, 'cause I don't know one department who's sitting around with their feet up on the desk looking for something to do, right? Everyone's
No.
busy, right? You
Yeah,
get that, you know,
I-
not,
My point
you know,
exactly.
yeah.
And if they're not forced to raise it in their priority list, then they
Right,
won't.
right, and that's, but even then, you know. Right, an ordinance only matters if it's enforced, because again, there's already an ordinance that says this plan is due, you know, I might get it backward, but I think the code of ordinances requires a 10-year plan.
Right,
And then the charter, the founding document of the city's government requires a fine. We blow that off. Every year we blow it off,
Constantly.
right? And so again, you go, we can make the best ordinance. But if it's gonna sit next to the ordinance that already says you need a 10-year plan, and next to the, again, the JD charter requirement that the administration put this together, right? Then what, you know, what, it's, good job us, we all exercised our brains and, you know, came up with a really good, but that remains my question, I guess. You know, maybe I did have a little faith and that's fine, but I'd be more intrigued to hear, you know, what like the mechanism is that we are, this is the time we get lift off, you
so
know?
here's
Yeah, yeah.
where, that's why I think we should try to figure out what the role we can play in pushing this, with recognizing that we remain in an advisory capacity. So can we put ourselves in the position of advocating that the administration adopt a plan to do the planning, to engage in this so that the steps are laid out? Or is that too much to ask? So that, you know, if we ask, what are the milestones you would like to develop and work towards? Is that too much for us to ask for, or is there a way to phrase it so that it puts the onus on city managers to move in that direction without making it appear like we just tried to overstep our reach?
I mean, it's just talking a little bit more general, like when we're working through the comprehensive plan, it's worded in a way because you understand that while you're doing the planning process, you may know like the steps that you think need to be taken to make it happen. But the people who actually go and take those steps need some flexibility to work within whatever circumstances they're going to be working on. Or maybe there's an additional process that comes from a recommendation. So like for an example, the asset management software that we're talking about here, like you must purchase the software. Well, the funding needs to be there to purchase it. I'm not necessarily a decision maker on whether it gets purchased or not. So it's just to say that as an opportunity arises, we want to make it a priority to procure this software because it's important. And that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about saying, no, these are bad ideas. No, we want to give them less power. But I think we just have to allow some flexibility based on circumstances and opportunities. And, you know, really craft something that's more along the lines of best practices. And doesn't sound so much like an ordinance, I guess.
But wouldn't any mayor and city council who is actually serious about this, why would they shy away from the mandate? Like, no, again, that's the way you kind of make it happen, right? You go, no, going forward, you're gonna have asset management software. We're not gonna in 2025 not have asset management software when we own X buildings and Y vehicles and yada, 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 right? Which is no other organization, again, public, not private, I understand that, but wouldn't that be? And if the mayor.
I would agree with you, except for the Reading that we're looking at that Connor already highlighted. And I think what I heard from Ryan when we interviewed him, he's saying, there's stuff off the shelf you can buy. It's not going to be as customizable necessarily to your local needs, but it's going to have all the basic elements of what you want to do for asset management, work orders, inventory controls, those kinds of things that are especially going to benefit Mike Hale and company. But it's not cheap. It's just to design it runs from $50,000 to $150,000 typically. As you're doing the case engineering, that kind of thing, before you even get it. And then to integrate it with the legacy systems, payroll systems, or any of the purchasing and auditing systems as a whole nother level. So, I mean, I heard that from Ryan, that these things,
But that's fine.
Why does that need?
I'm
to
not
be
making an
integrated into
excuse.
those?
But even those numbers on the scale we're talking about here, right? So let's say, if Gloucester wants its own custom software, let's say it costs $250,000 to, between an inception and getting it actually up and running, right? That's one of those things where I think, as the citizen input that we are, you go, I know it was ARPA money, but we found $1 million. Cost $1 million to fix the roof and paint the Legion. I would have done it for 700. I don't know how to paint or fix a roof, but I would have learned, right? For $700,000 to fix that roof and paint that building, right? We have $1 million and we have a tenant in there who we don't charge rent,
Yeah, well, that's.
who can't afford.
Don't
to-
even get me
No,
started.
but these are decisions that we as a city make, right? And so we go, hey, we have a tenant in there who can't afford to maintain the building. And instead of finding them a smaller space and putting something in there that, again, can rent for free, but will just maintain the building like a normal, tenant would of a commercial property, we just dropped $1 million because, right? And so you go, if we can do that, but this $250,000 for this thing that is gonna have, citywide benefit,
Longevity.
right? Like, okay, great. The building looks a lot nicer when I go in for karaoke night at the bar, right? Like, that's what we spent $1 million on, right? A function hall is used for almost nothing upstairs, right? And that was a priority
Huh?
that the mayor and the city council, had, right? And so I'm saying, if the mayor and city council have really consider this a priority, I can't imagine there isn't, $250,000 can be allocated to do it.
I do get your point that, rare funding opportunity with ARPA to do some work, and we have to hope that there are more things out there, and hopefully like what we're laying out on the table now can help elevate this as a priority. And that is the benefit of having it in our comprehensive plan and going through this exercise. To be fair about the Legion and everything, that these decisions were made through community listening sessions, so it wasn't just.
Oh, I was on were you on the thing too? Were you on that too?
Yes, so there were a lot of stakeholders involved, and that funding was used in a lot of different places. But as I mentioned, I mean, this is a way to elevate this as a priority when we have those opportunities in the future. And what we're doing here is saying, these are the recommendations for what the process should be. These are the things that we need to make it that kind of process. And then it is really the role of, senior leadership to give the directives that we're going and make those decisions, considering all the other things that they need to consider.
Well, I was just about if, the kind of interesting and additional advisory role we've been granted, which I appreciate, advising on this. Our advice, or at least from my, one man's view on this board, our advice should be very strong shalls and musts, because this is our advice, right? We think this, and then, right, but we're not actually enacting this, we're not submitting it for approval, right? And then the senior manager can say, I don't want shall, I'll add, shall use best practices to obtain, like, that's fine, right? That's, you can take our advice and do what you want, but I don't think we should be undercutting if we feel this is, again, using to just stay on the asset management software as like the thing as an
Yeah.
example. If we feel that is a critical component of being able to really actually capital plan ongoing, then we shouldn't water down our advice. Again, it's all it is advice, and they having a different view of it and a more in depth in the weeds, kind of thing. They go, yeah, listen, shall sounds great, but it's not feasible right now. So we have to shall, use best practices, right? And that's fine. We gave our advice. Some of it was taken, some of it was adjusted, some of it was rejected. That's what advice is, right?
And that's kind of how this works, right? You make the recommendations based on your expertise. You're elevating that to senior leadership and then they are using that to make decisions. right?
So here's a way to sort of get both of those. You can describe the components of a best practice capital planning program, which I think are mostly laid out here. And you don't need to say, you shall do X. It just says at the beginning, in the intro, the preamble, whatever you want to, the whereases and the, because of the lack of comprehensive planning, the city needs to undertake an initiative that's going to introduce, develop, plan a best practices capital planning program, which will examine and adopt where feasible the following components of following best practice components. And then you just sort of enumerate the best practice components. That way it doesn't feel like we're sort of, because I understand completely. You've been doing this now for 14 years. What is the definition of insanity? So,
Yeah.
you've been down this path. Ironically, the mayor himself was on a 2010 panel that looked at the city's capital assets and said, we need to do something like this. And his name and two current city councilors' names are both on as the signatories.
And the mayor understands the importance of this.
Yeah.
We want this to happen. We want you to continue, but we want you to be able to really make meaningful contributions and be able to advise. So
Well, we want to advise, but we also want to, there's some feet holding to fire in
Yeah.
here. And I think that's your point, that we can't just sit there and then hope there's a conversation within the next 6 months that someone says, oh, by the way, we should get back to that. No, there should be a articulated plan for moving forward on these fronts.
yeah, and I think it is really laid out here. It's sort of more semantics than anything, but that's understanding that some of this stuff is dependent on the decision makers and the circumstances. We wanted to talk to you also about like, what can we do in the meantime? So we're not just spinning our wheels. And, one of those things is to really look at capital requests differently and then have a way to rank those requests and you to be able to weigh in and
Which is great, and I appreciate that. That's like more progress than we've seen. And I think also a more organized approach to soliciting that kind of information. But even some elementary steps that we had thought were going to be put in place, like we would get advance notice about decisions that were coming down. I read eventually in the newspaper about Rust Island. I read in the newspaper that decisions were finally made on the scope of the police station improvements. So even this simple communication never transpired.
I think the police station came as a $600,000 window repair project about 8 years ago.
Yes, and
Right, yeah.
there for a whole lot of good and necessary reasons. And there's actually some money coming in on the end of that from the state, but
Right, I think that one of the other benefits of getting this right is, as you mentioned, the turnover, right? Like staff is forever, city councilors aren't forever, right? Like, yeah, sure, like Jason's been around, Jeff's been on and off, like that's, Tony's been adjacent to the school committee forever, but like, Counselor Benson, Counselor Grace, they're new to the game. And again, I don't know, I mean, not to, I assume they were living normal lives beforehand and we're not like knee deep in this stuff, right? And so it'd be really useful for someone like that to go, we need to replace this major thing. Well, here's this little, it's been on the list for a while and these other things that were ahead of it have come off and like this, makes some sense. They're just kind of in a vacuum of like, well, I guess we need to do Russ Island, right? Like, did we,
yeah, I mean, that was came out of left field,
Right, and that again goes to like, again,
Trubisky's.
yeah,
No, I
right,
know where.
right. You got money to provide deep water for people, you know, with oceanfront property that bought it at a discount that didn't have deep water. But we aren't sure whether we have $250,000 for really crucial software for capital planning, right? Like, that's the kind of stuff where you go, you know, I get a little like,
W2T,
but just like, please, you know, like, I appreciate that. I saw the red in that slide. But, you know, that was like, was Rust Island.
we even doing an assessment of what Public Works is using to track its inventory. That's not a high-end, high-cost item, but to take a look and do a bit of a dive on the spreadsheets that are maintained, and the quality of the information, and the feedback loops that come back from the field, so that that air conditioning unit that got serviced is actually that's internal management stuff that can be done in a very straightforward, unthreatening way. And yet, when we had the conversation with Mike Hale as a subcommittee, I don't think we got, he didn't volunteer to have
No.
this stuff looked at.
No, he'd rather not let us
So, you know,
look under his.
that's again,
I think that's one of our biggest hurdles or roadblocks is the amount of transparency that is going to be created here. And we can get verbal okays from everyone. Oh, we're in, but it's the action of people agreeing and really going forward with it.
And I think that maybe, to be fair, again, you know, the kind of the same concern or skepticism that I have is probably on, again, some of the department heads who've been here forever, right? You go, hey, Mike, we're gonna really need a good capital plan. He's like, all right, like, I'll do it, you know, I've done it before, and then I submit it, and, you know, and then I still have, you know, my, like, the DPW building, right? I'm, you know, right, so years ago. Right, like years ago, that thing, again, the like, last time an advisory priority was given, like that building was given priority over so many other projects that have since happened, including his salt shed.
Right.
Like we're like, yeah, well, like we'd rather fix your main barn than give you a bigger salt shed, like, you know, whatever. And, you know, and so he produced a plan, there was some advice on it, and then things fell apart, and all of a sudden the new salt shed got purchased and built, and the barn is still falling apart. And so I appreciate that, like someone like Mike or, you know, Chief Smith, right? We had the meeting with Chief Smith when you guys all first came on board, and he pulled out his request, and I was like, just checking it against what he brought like 10 years ago. I was like, oh my God, we still haven't, you know, haven't dealt with these things that he was at, you know, 10 years ago. He was like, hey, I think we need these, you know, in the next 10 years. And then he got to us 10 years later, was like, hey, I need these yesterday, you know?
Right.
string them back.
Yeah, so what assurance do these department heads have? We'd be asking them to do more effort and identify and make all this information known. And what assurance do they have that all that work is even gonna amount to anything? Are they just gonna be in the same situation, you know? And I can see how there'd be a little bit of, you know, trepidation about it.
No one wants to make work simply to make it look good.
Exactly.
And we've all been in that role at some point or another, so appreciate the point, Kelly. But I don't think we can just sit here and just say, well, then we'll let the status quo persist because we've got, you know, 5 years of red ink facing us, and we've got the Damocles sword. Who wants that plant named after themselves, by the way? So
The New Balance suture plant.
Yeah.
Jim, got anything left?
the
Maybe we can give a
unbalanced.
call.
So I think we've got to figure out a way to, if this board's gonna have any purpose, a way to get this launched in a constructive fashion by starting with the low-hanging fruit, which there's buy-in from the administration's senior staff, and even if it's a modest plan, to pick off different pieces of these component elements of best practice. And that, to me, is at least, we started something.
It's a
We
start.
lit a fuse.
Sure.
We didn't get the whole enchilada, but that wasn't gonna happen anyway. Otherwise, we'd still be in 2010, Back to the Future or something.
Yeah, and just like to, I think for us, you know, and for the department, you know, I appreciate what's been done so far, and just curious to see how, you know, again, like, has Greg, since he's been mayor, has Greg ever come to one of our meetings?
He came to one of them in City Hall.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of the early meetings, and that was where he asked that we look at the ordinance
okay.
and try to, and once he started looking at the ordinance, I said, there's no problem with the ordinance. It's the fact that you've never implemented it,
Do it.
you've never formalized it, you've never created an actual capital improvements planning program.
Well, it's something like, as far as, you know, you're saying, right, you need a champion with carrots and sticks or whatever. And so like, you know, we got the CFO and the community development director, you know, but I'm just looking, you know, used to have, you know, like Jim Nestino, who, you know, while the CIO was basically, you know, the acting mayor, right? He would be president of these things. Carolyn didn't come to all of them, but Carolyn, and she had Jim Duggan at the time, she would show up, you know, she was involved in these meetings, not for everyone, right? And so I feel like this, you know, not being this delegation, but I'm just showing as far as like, you know, the further delegation of dealing with the CIAB, you know, you go, okay, you know, you can't threaten another department, right? You're like, hey, Chief Smith, if you don't do this, you'll get funding, because you're like, he's right there with you, right? You need someone who's like, hey, Chief Smith, this is really important to me. I need you to please, I know you've done it before, I know it didn't go well before, I need you to give it one more shot, we're gonna get it right this time. You know what I'm trying to say? And like, that's my kind of concern is,
Well, if Danvers doesn't get the CAO, I would at least like to think that, because we have no role if there's no plan.
right,
There's nothing to review.
right.
We're sort of like,
But I think, you
The
know, if we
Pirandello
implement
play.
These steps that Connor's proposing, we have some criteria for ranking capital requests. And we can play an advisory role. I think you gotta keep in mind, it's a democratic process. There are a lot of different interests that come from a lot of different places. There's different levels of influence. There's some things that people think are bigger needs than others, internally and externally. But what we have here in this board is to be able to say objectively, this is what we think the best decision is. This is how we think you should proceed. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it means that we are giving a more objective recommendation for what we think is best.
well, if anyone has an interest in the comprehensive plans, various goals and strategies, about half of them can't get done without being part of a comprehensive planning process, capital planning process.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Okay, so let me ask this question then procedurally, like, let's like, you know, glass half full of this and, you know, gonna be, this is the time, right? Like, you know, a lot of rockets blow up on the launch pad before one finally gets to space, right? Maybe we're done blowing up on the launch pad, we're actually gonna leave the atmosphere this time, right? So my question is, we have, you know, this kind of like extra advisory thing we've been asked to do as far as, you know, what we think needs to be part of it, you know, advise on what a capital planning process could be, right? That's kind of a little ad hoc thing we've been asked to do here. And then otherwise, as you said, we don't have much to do until a plan happens, because our duty is to take the plan. And again, I appreciate the democratic process. At the end of the day, like I said, the charter requires it. Like this, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. This is a charter requirement that this get produced, you know, consistently. And so is there anything we need to do besides like, hey, here's our advice on what we think a good planning process would be? And then again, the department heads and the, you know, mayor's office will put together their version of it based on our advice and other, you know, internal knowledge and expertise. You get your process going, whatever it looks like, you know, and then it takes, you know, how many months, years before the actual product that is supposed to be produced by the city for us to review gets produced, because, you know, do we just go dark until then? Are there other ad hoc advisory things? But again, you know, the same way I'm harping about these plans are required by code and by charter, our charge is narrow by charter, you know? And so it almost seems like we have to spin this up, provide our advice, and then our hands are off it until plans start coming out. And then when plans start coming out, we would be activated to review these plans.
Well, there's an annual update. And that's in both the code and the charter. To either the 5 or 10-year plan, depending which document you're reading. And that annual update is part and parcel of what we're supposed to be engaged in. And that update has to address both the stuff that's already in the pipeline, in process, funded, shovel in the ground, or projected to be in the next fiscal year. So I think there is a continuous role if we were to conform to the provisions of the code and the charter. And that is to produce a long-range plan, an annual update. We do recommendations to the mayor on that. We also have a role in the guidelines that the city council is supposed to approve, which are supposed to define how the plan gets developed and the criteria that are used, such as we already described. So we can also be talking about what those guidelines are. Well, what's the cost threshold? How do we rank things by needs so that you can actually have a prioritization scheme? I think there's a role, and as Conrad has described, this fall, if information starts coming in at the request of the administration, it'll happen for the election. We could be playing a role in that. I can see a number of tasks that we can be involved with, and may not conform to the exact terms of the charter, but we can begin to.
Before we have asset mapping software, we could do things like decide the threshold for what goes into the capital plan. I understand some of that exists, but
Needs to be updated regardless.
but that
10 years ago, 14 years ago.
we can show you the asset mapping for sewer infrastructure and have Bill Gillis come and talk about that, and that could give us some thoughts about how we could do that more broadly.
Is it scalable?
Well, that's what we can look at, right?
Yeah, no, but that's, so it sounds like, just thinking like next steps, right? So we need to provide our ad hoc advice on what we think makes a good capital planning process. Submit that, and then the city can do. Right, but it's just,
Pretty much done.
right, but it sounds like from tonight that, you were looking to.
I'm just sort of looking at the
I don't want
wordsmith
to
it in a
soften
way.
it up too much. We present it as an advice. You can redline it and send it back and see what we think.
Or not even see what we think, right? They just take it and say, we got your advice, and we'll
There
take
it
it.
is. Yeah, thank you.
I would just say, instead of shall adopt, shall do, I would just say the components of the best practice capital planning program consist of the following.
It's
It's wordsmithing, that's all it is, but.
fine. I'm okay either way. What I'm trying to get to is, okay, so this task. At some point, we need to, I suppose we as a board need to vote on a final draft of our advice,
Mhm.
whether it's this, whether it's your reword, whatever it is, right? So it sounds like our next meeting needs to be a very short meeting in which,
We have
we
something to work.
take a vote and say, you need a motion to approve the advice to the administration as the best practice for capital planning process. Boom, gets approved, it gets submitted, right? And then they can take some of it, none of it, all whatever they want to do, right?
We can submit that to the mayor.
And then it sounds like our next thing would be, if requested, would be define capital project.
The elements of what.
Or sorry, or advise, right? Provide advice on what a capital project would be,
Criteria.
right? And so we would need a request, the mayor's office
Mhm.
for that advice.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
then we could begin reconvening on that task, right? And that's us being useful while, the city's dealing with the capital planning process that we've advised on previously, right? And then, I don't know, maybe.
And then as Connor's developing fiscal policies and procedures, I think we could get your input on that as well.
Just like, despite my tone, I am happy to help, but I just don't want to waste anyone's time, including the city staff. Again, like I said, I don't know anyone who's got free time, right? And so I just, want to make sure that we're,
Appreciate it,
yeah.
if-
But does that sound like reasonable next steps,
yeah,
so-
I mean, that's, in my mind, works. Try to get that in the minutes.
Is there anything else we need to do at this moment, or?
No, I think I have to order a pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah. For home consumption, sorry, it wasn't.
Connor, are you
Next
home or are
time.
you asking?
Yeah, next.
Earlier.
Connor, are you home or are you at City Hall?
I'm at City Hall.
Or where do you live?
I was kind of bopping back and forth. I was having a great discussion about trash bag fees before this.
I
Time to
understand.
make it home.
Jill said she would have been here,
She was at
but she's
subcommittee.
talking about trash.
Trash bag fees.
There you go. Her priority.
Yeah.
She doesn't like this. I know she doesn't. I just.
Again, because I think, Jill has, 30 things to do in a day and time to do 12 of them. And so we're adding a 31st thing,
No, understood.
Yeah.
And to his credit, but the mayor has on several occasions, both with the full board and then in a smaller sort of planning meeting, wanted us to come forth with, and I kept trying to push back and saying, till there's a process for developing a plan that's formalized, there's no plan for us to review. And so it's kind of one of those back and forth.
Glad we do have a new IT director coming on board.
Really good.
It would probably be good to give them a briefing on where we are with asset mapping. Not to say they're gonna snap their fingers and get software for us, but again, the
Well,
value of having this is to elevate it.
Put it on his priority list and he can start looking out.
Well,
Market.
Ryan Knowles' perspective was
Yeah.
interesting because he'd come from a corporation
Yeah,
that
he had
managed multiple sites. And they had this all built into their operations.
The new IT director's name?
Um,
John Gillis.
yes, he just tuned into our first staff meeting this morning. Yeah.
Is he already local or has he moved here yet or?
Yeah, he's from Gloucester.
Wow.
Is he Bob's son?
No relation.
No, relation. It's
No relation
totally.
to the one we know. Yeah, the same as me. Yeah.
Well, so I moved to adjourn this meeting.
I heard a motion to adjourn. Kelly? Got to
A
second?
second. Yep.
All in favor?
Hi.
6:51.
Thank you guys so much. I do appreciate the time.
We're gonna flatline now.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Get that pizza.
Thank you.
So are you all gonna